Warning: the material discussed in this show may be sensitive or a trigger for some listeners. Strong language and topics are discussed. We talk with active duty service members and practice OPSEC at all times. You have been warned.
The Bipolar DM, Jason Caughton. His show talks about Dungeons and Dragons, indie writing, and living with a mental illness, in particular bipolar disorder, borderline disorder, and major depression, among other diagnoses. Check us out right here on Saturdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, also on WLFE-DB.com, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. So take a seat, sit back, and get ready for the Bipolar DM.
Welcome to the Bipolar DM podcast, the Bipolar DM Show. This is your host, Jason, the Bipolar DM. I am happy to have you here. This is a show about Dungeons and Dragons, indie writing, and living with a mental illness, in particular bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, and major depression, among other diagnoses. If you want to reach us, you can contact us by email at thebipolardm@gmail.com or go to our webpage, thebipolardm.com. There you'll find previous episodes of my podcast, of my show, links to my shows, as well as resources on indie writing, Dungeons and Dragons, and mental health. Be sure to go to our Facebook page. We do have a Facebook page. The handle for that is at BipolarDM. This is a little bit more up to date than my web page, just because it's an easier platform for me to post videos, articles, and other content on a regular basis. I try and do daily updates on that. And so check that out. Also, please check out WLFE-DB.com radio network on Facebook. Just do a search for that. Or WLFE-DB on Variety Unlimited on Facebook. So those two right there, if you do searches for that, you can also watch our shows live. But not only our shows, but other shows that we have, such as Card Pulls and Coffee with Lindsay, Everything Yet Nothing, Meet the Authors, Metal Mayhem, Paratalk Radio, among other shows that we got going on. You can also watch our shows and previous episodes of this show on twitch.tv/TheBipolarDM. We are a proud supporter of Safe Space, and if you're not familiar what a safe space is, it is a virtual place that you can go to when you're in crisis or having problems. And we are not psychiatrists, we're not psychologists, we're not here to solve your problems or answer, or any of that. But what we are here to do is listen and not judge. And if you are having problems, if you're struggling, reach out to us. Go to WLFE-DB.com for more information and click on the Safe Space button that's very prominent down below. And there you can find resources to help you out if you're suffering from depression, anxiety, or other ailments that are affecting your mental health, and as well as find support and people who care for you. Check out also, you can watch us on Variety Unlimited. On Strim TV. The channel is Variety Unlimited, and that has our show on there on a regular basis. You can watch it through your TV sets. And also, one other thing we have going on is that we have the Veteran Podcast Awards coming up very soon. Voting had just ended last week, and the awards are going to be announced on October 5th, 2021. And so go to veteranpodcastawards.com, and if you want to check out some of our podcasts by our military and veterans, as well as their spouses, and see us on the 5th of October to see who wins. We got several categories going on, so hopefully I pull one off and get one of those really nice shiny trophies. Looks really cool. We have a Patreon account. I have a Patreon supporter, my number one supporter, Siobhan, and very appreciative of her and her support of the show. And if you like what I'm doing and the show that I'm putting on, as well as my other contents, be sure to give us a little support. We have goodies at all support levels. If you go to patreon.com/bipolar DM, you can find out more information about that. In today's show, we're going to be talking about some of the mental health aspects of the results of 9/11 and what had happened 20 years ago. Now, last week I tried to do this show, but just because of my mental health, I was not able to complete the show. I was having severe symptoms from my bipolar. A lot of it was triggered by content that was being shown on TV about 9/11 news and all that stuff just going around. And so I wasn't able to do the show. So I'm kind of doing this show as a makeup for last week's. And now that I'm a little bit more stable, we can have this conversation about 9/11 and what had happened. And I hate to say, if you're not aware of 9/11, everybody's aware of it. 20 years ago, we were attacked by terrorists. And the result of that was in thousands of deaths. Thousands of deaths. Two of the World Trade Center was demolished when 2 airplanes struck each tower. The Pentagon was damaged when a plane struck that. And a field out in Pennsylvania had a plane crash there when the passengers who had heard about the World Trade Center and Pentagon rose up against the terrorists and tried to retake the plane. And instead of allowing them to take over the plane again, regain control of the plane, the terrorists nosedived it into the ground, killing all on board. And so there is a beautiful monument out there in Pennsylvania on the exact spot where the plane had crashed. And but it's only available either by appointment only or for family members, or it's not open to the general public, is what I'm saying. So if you happen to be in Pennsylvania and want to visit that memorial, you have to make special arrangements if it is available to visit it. They limit it very much. It's a very sacred place to a lot of people, as well as Ground Zero, or what was Ground Zero, the World Trade Center, and the memorial that's out there. So 20 years ago, it's hard to believe it's been 20 years. It just seems like yesterday almost that this had happened. And at the time, yes, there were divisions between the parties, Republican, Democrat, and all that. But for a short time after 9/11, the country pulled together in patriotism and support of one another, and we were one voice. Of course, that's since long gone, and how we are now is more divisive and more vitriol than I had ever seen it in my life. It's unreal how much we are going at each other's throats. Not just Congress, not just the Senate or the executive branch, but citizens in general. They just, people are no longer interested in civil discourse. They're more interested in striking out, lashing out at other people who don't agree with what they believe in, instead of sitting down and trying to have a conversation about bigger issues. And that became very evident during this last election cycle. And not only that, but also more recently the recall attempt in California, and showed the true colors of a lot of people who claim that they're compassionate, claim that they're tolerant, yet they're not. They showed who they really were in. But that's neither here nor there. What we do know is, 9/11 had happened. A lot of people were affected by it. And some psychological studies that had come out following 9/11, there was one actually reported in, that's NewYork.gov. Sorry, I'm getting to it. Yeah. Uh, yeah. NY.gov did a study right after 9/11 and then the following months afterwards. And it says on NewYork.gov, those directly affected by 9/11 were more likely to report post traumatic stress disorder symptoms 6 months after 9/11. However, a substantial number not directly affected also met the criteria for probable PTSD. And they're meaning people that weren't there, didn't see the planes, but witnessed it as it was unfolding on television and other social medias. In a study that examined the prevalence of resilience among New Yorkers during the 6 months after 9/11, 65% of participants showed resiliency, the ability to recover. This suggests that more New Yorkers demonstrated resilience during the 6 months after 9/11 than previously believed. Even among those with the highest level exposure and the highest probable PTSD, the proportion that were resilient never dropped below 33%. A study of low income patients 7 to 16 months after 9/11 did find that those suffering a 9/11 related loss were twice as likely to be diagnosed with a mental health condition such as depression, anxiety, or PTSD. This group also was more likely to suffer functional impairment and work loss. Patients with loved ones in danger on 9/11 or who knew someone involved in the rescue and recovery efforts were twice as likely to suffer from an anxiety disorder. So, the study showed that, they didn't know how people were going to handle 9/11. And it showed that the New Yorkers there, especially those who actually witnessed it and or were in the city when it happened or knew somebody that was working ground zero, they bounced back really well. And it goes to show how tough people can be, especially after that. You would have thought that PTSD and mental health issues would just skyrocket right after there, and it did in some ways, but not the numbers that they were anticipating or worrying about. On the conversation.com, the team found a measurable impact on the mental and physical health, such as increase of heart disease, of the sample 3 years after the attacks. Importantly, those who responded with distress in the immediate aftermath were more likely to report subsequent problems as well. What a lot of people have found out as far as in the study about heart disease and stress and stuff like that is that stress does put a lot of pressure on the heart and overworks it so much that it can cause heart attacks or heart disease, stuff like that. And so it was going to show that there was a measurable impact, and but not just on adults. The study also went on to do the impact on children. It is also a case that studies have found the number of children who reported longer-term distress symptoms to be relatively low. Among other factors, children whose parents had low coping abilities or themselves had learning disabilities tended to report higher distress. So it goes to show a correlation between the parents and the kids, where if the parents had poor coping mechanisms and weren't handling things so well, it affected the kids as well, even though the kids may not have been directly affected by watching the images or seeing what had happened on 9/11. And so there was a correlation that they found between the two. The study had two primary congruent findings. First, people who experienced greater number of direct exposure to prior collective trauma, e.g. 9/11, such as the Sandy Hook military shootings, Superstorm Sandy, who had previous trauma, reported higher acute stress symptoms after the Boston Marathon bombings. I'm not sure why that had in there, but I'm sure it had that it also shows that 9/11, people who had already been exposed to a lot of stress and stuff like that were more likely to, those who had problems with PTSD and other things like that, prior to 9/11 were more likely to show symptoms again. Now, a greater amounts of media-based live exposure. People watched or listened to the event as it occurred live on television, radio, or online streaming. To prior collective trauma were also associated with higher acute stress symptoms. So greater direct and media-based exposure to prior collective trauma was linked to greater acute stress responses, anxiety, nightmares, trouble concentrating after a subsequent event. So, people should stay informed, is what the conclusion of this study was, but limit repeated exposure to the disturbing image, which can elicit post-traumatic stress and lead to a negative psychological and physical health outcomes. So what they're talking about is be careful about what you take in and how much of it. It's one thing to, because it was one thing to watch the planes go in, but then, hit the towers, but to have it shown on television over and over and over again like they did, rose the cases of post-traumatic stress and the negative impacts that happen to people. Now, exposure to graphic television image may exacerbate psychological symptoms in disaster situations. We tested the hypothesis that one, more frequent viewings of television images of the September 11th terrorist attack was associated with post-traumatic stress disorder and depression, and two, direct exposure to the disaster events had an interactive effect with the media viewing. They recruited over 1,000 adult residents of the boroughs of Manhattan and New York City, and through a random digit dial telephone survey conducted between October 16th and November 15th of 2001, this is a month after 9/11, respondents who reportedly saw people falling or jumping from the towers of the World Trade Center had a higher prevalence of PTSD, and that was 17.4% of them, and depression, which was 14.7% of the population that was tested, than those who did not, which is that the baseline would then be 6.2% for PTSD and 5.3% respectively for depression. So, twice as likely, if not more, sometimes even 3 times higher, those who had watched it had PTSD than those that had just who didn't. And exposure to media and exposure to bad news does this. And does that mean we should stick our head in the sand and not watch the news, that we should avoid knowing what's going on in the world? No. But we need to be careful and be mindful of our mental health, especially those of us who suffer from mental illness of some kind, because we're more likely to suffer from the images on the media, even if we're not there, even if we're not even in the same state as what a disaster has happened, can be triggering symptoms of PTSD and depression if they were not careful. So what have we learned from 9/11? Well, we learned that people bounced back a lot better than was expected. But at the same time, even people who were just watching TV were more likely, to suffer. Even people who were watching TV had a chance of getting PTSD, even if they had not witnessed it firsthand in person, like a lot of people had in New York and in Pennsylvania or in the Pentagon. And so with a lot of these studies, we're finding that media does have a huge impact on us. And this is something I've known for years. What you take in through your eyes, through your ears, affects your body in your mind just as much as what you take in through your mouth. Eating and drinking and stuff like that. You know, if you're eating sugar all day and drinking alcohol and stuff like that, or doing drugs, yeah, that's going to have a negative impact on your physical health. Just as same, what you take in visually and auditory can have a negative impact on your mental health. And so we need to be careful about what we what we do, and watching, exposing ourselves to constant barrage of media coverage on events, and to be careful about that. Our military response to 9/11 was overwhelmingly, it was like after Pearl Harbor. I mean, the country was behind our military, and the mission ahead, which was to first invade Afghanistan and then also Iraq, for similar reasons, although later on it proved that, the reasons why we went in there weren't there. Although there is some uh, um, conflicting reports that I have heard from people who are personally there during the invasion of Iraq, soldiers there, and the stuff they seen, so while, WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, may not have been located like they claim in Iraq, a lot of bad stuff was found there. That, such as chemical weapons stockpiles and stuff like that, mustard gas and sarin gas and cyanide and stuff like that. And so a lot of that stuff was destroyed in burn pits, and our soldiers suffered from the chemical effects of that, such as cancer and lung and respiratory problems, and other issues that they had developed from the burn pits of destroying all those chemical weapons. And the aftermath of the war on the public was a great strain on it. I mean, 20 years of war was huge. Now, I'm not against the withdrawal of our troops from Afghanistan altogether. I mean, Afghanistan historically, and I'm talking history here, has never been conquered by anybody. Not by the Romans, not by the Soviets, not by the British, not by us. And we didn't go in there, but we didn't go in there to establish an empire. We went in there to clean the mess up there. And unfortunately, because of the region, because of the culture and stuff like that, we were in a no-win mission. And the results of that were very clear with the collapse of the government and military following our leading up to our withdrawal from Afghanistan. And so, but the aftermath of war was an increase in PTSD and depression, was an increase in anxiety amongst our troops. And, but unlike previous wars, the military finally got its head out of its fourth point of contact and started realizing that soldiers needed to be treated for PTSD and for anxiety and for depression following going into combat into a war zone. And unlike Vietnam and World War II or Korea or World War One, they weren't persecuting people for having a mental disorder. Yes, the military culture is still 50 years in the past when it comes to dealing with PTSD and stuff like that, but they're slowly coming around. And the 22 a day, which is 22 soldiers, will commit suicide by the end of the day, was a sobering fact that made the military and the VA system finally wake up and say, we got to do something about this epidemic that was happening. That a soldier is 3 times more likely to commit suicide if they had been contacting, especially those in combat, than the civilian population. So, a lot of stuff came out of the war. And, and some of it, fortunately was good. So, what about society and how they deal with it? Well, a lot more awareness has come about when it comes to PTSD, although a lot of people are still in the dark about it. They don't know what it is, they don't know what it's not, and if you want to know, the Mayo Clinic put this out about defines post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, as a mental health condition that's triggered by a terrifying event, either experiencing it or witnessing it. Symptoms may include flashbacks, nightmares, and severe anxiety, as well as uncontrollable thoughts about the event itself. PTSD symptoms are generally grouped into 4 types. There's intrusive memories, there's avoidance, which is avoiding anything that would trigger intrusive memories. Negative changes in thinking and mood, basically being more pessimistic and more depressive. And changes in physical and emotional reactions, how people react. And so like I mentioned in some of these studies I read out loud, people who had suffered previous trauma of some kind were more likely to basically re-injure themselves, is kind of the gist of it. Now, some of the symptoms of PTSD, they can vary over time and vary from person to person. So it doesn't mean that once you have the symptom, you're always going to have it. But it also means once it goes away, it can come back. So sometimes these things come and go. As I've known from my own personal experience with PTSD, that sometimes I'm great and sometimes I'm not. But some of the symptoms are as follows. If you have these from PTSD, it's such as being easily startled or frightened, such as loud noises and stuff like that. Always being on guard for danger, hypervigilance, always looking around for the next thing to happen. Self-destructive behavior, such as drinking too much or driving too fast, doing drugs, stuff like that. Things that destroy your life, kind of like a slow suicide is what it's like. Having trouble sleeping, from nightmares or dysomnia or other problems, trouble concentrating and focusing, irritability, anger outbursts, or aggressive behavior. Now, this is a big one, especially after the Vietnam War. We saw this, the irritability and angry outbursts and stuff like that. And people just didn't understand why people were so angry or why they would lash out like that. And sometimes we don't understand the feelings that we have inside us, and we become angry about it, become irritable about it, because we don't understand why we feel the way we do. Also, overwhelming guilt or shame, especially survivor's guilt, is huge. Now, children 6 years old and younger, the signs and symptoms for them may also include these things. So they may have the other symptoms I just mentioned, but they also may have these other 2 symptoms, which is reenacting the traumatic events or aspects of the traumatic event through play, such as with dolls, cars, stuff like that, or have frightening dreams that may or may not include aspects of the traumatic event. A lot of times kids will have nightmares about it, and they may not be able to express themselves as to what they're having nightmares about. So so kids are affected a lot too, and but there is hope, there is treatment, and there is care. And but before we get into some more stuff about PTSD and all that, the medication, wellness, and all, let's go ahead and take a commercial break real quick, and then we'll pick this up on the other half of the show. Welcome back. This is the Bipolar DM Show, and thank you for tuning in. Just to let you know, if you want to watch us live, we are available on Saturdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where you watch this, such as on Facebook Live. You can go to WLFE-DB.com for more information about getting where and when you can watch this show, as well as going to my webpage, thebipolardm.com. I got links on there for the live show, links to previous episodes. Also, we have merchandise available for the show. I got to show the real quick sample of some of the stuff that we got. We got t-shirts such as the Bipolar DM t-shirt and the I Hate Bipolar, It's Awesome t-shirt. We have stickers and we have buttons available too. So if you're interested in purchasing these things, go to Facebook and look up at Bipolar DM. I have a Facebook store there. And consider helping us out by buying some merchandise. And I'll get those out as quickly as possible as soon as you make your order. Now, we talked about what PTSD is, and we can talk about what PTSD is not. First of all, PTSD is not contagious. Just because one person has it doesn't mean it spreads out through everybody. Now, it can affect other people in the family, through actions and stuff like that, but it doesn't spread that way, and other things that PTSD is not, it's something that can be treated. It's not untreatable. It's not something that has to be permanent that you have to live with and endure for the rest of your life. There is treatment and hope out there for you, those of you who have suffered from a traumatic event and have PTSD or depression. And the best way to deal with PTSD is to get help, professional help, and to see people. Now, I've seen on some other shows, and I'm going to talk about people who don't believe in modern psychiatry or psychology and think you can just think your way to healthiness and you don't need drugs. And you know what? Drugs, as far as medication goes, medication is not a silver bullet. Medication will not solve your problems, but what it will do is a tool. It is one of many tools you need to have in your toolbox in order to recover and to maintain your life and to be resilient. And so medication is very important. And when we talk about medication, we're talking about legitimate prescribed medication, not self-medicating with drugs or alcohol, but taking your medication as prescribed by a licensed doctor at the right time, right route, which means don't crush up your pills and snort them or melt them down and inject them, and the right time, which means also don't take all your medications for the day all at once. You take it as prescribed, especially if it has to be spread out through the day. And so medication is extremely important, but it's a tool. Another tool to have in the toolbox is therapy. Therapy is fantastic, especially when it's combined with medication and treatment, because it helps you work through a lot of issues, help you understand what's going on inside, especially the feelings that you might be suffering from and experiencing. And so therapy is a tremendous tool to have in your toolbox along with medication. And another part of taking care of yourself is also taking care of your body. Proper diet and exercise, avoiding certain foods and certain ingredients can have a tremendous impact on your psyche, as well as your physical health, whether or not you suffer from diabetes or heart disease or any other ailment. Just having the right diets, again, diet alone is not going to cure it, but diet's going to help. Exercise will help also, especially with relieving stress. Now, there's good stress and there's bad stress. So not all stress is bad. There's good stress that, like a challenge that pushes you to push through. And then there's the bad stress, which drags you down and tears you up and makes your life miserable. But exercise is a fantastic way to burn through that and get a lot of stress out of you. Support groups are great too. Finding support groups from other people who suffer from the same things that you do. Maybe not the same traumatic event, but a PTSD support group or a depression support group or other mental health support group is fantastic because, first of all, you find out that you're not alone. It's not just you that is suffering from what you're suffering from, but that there are other people out there that have been down the same road as you, who are currently traveling the same road as you, maybe even be a little bit behind you in their recovery. Everybody's on a road, and there are different stages of it. And so some people are still, miles behind, and some people are ahead. Some people have finished the journey of recovery. But using support groups is tremendously helpful, especially when you combine them with all these other tools that you put in your toolbox. And one thing that is extremely important that I cannot overemphasize, and that is avoiding illegal drugs or unprescribed medication and alcohol. Alcohol is a depressant. It will make things worse. It doesn't help. It may numb the pain for right now, but it makes you depressed. Drugs, on the other hand, affect the chemical balance in your brain. And so if you're on medication and taking illegal drugs, it's going to screw a lot of things up and undo the work that the medication is supposed to be doing in you. And also taking other people's pills that have not been prescribed to you is dangerous. For one thing, there are things called contraindications, things that mean you don't take this medication with this medication, or you don't take it with this particular illness or condition. And you need a doctor in order to be able to determine whether or not a medication should be properly prescribed to you and inappropriate. So avoid taking other people's meds. Don't shuffle through your grandmother's medicine cabinet seeing what she's got. Go to the doc, get your own pills. Create a positive and comfortable environment in your living space. That one right there is really a fantastic way to help deal with stress, anxiety, and depression, and creating a positive environment in your home, whether it's through music, through aromatherapy, through, just having a good time, having a positive outlook and positivity will help you tremendously, especially when you need to escape from the world. Hobbies are great. I love hobbies. I got several of them, and hobbies help take your mind off of it. They help you get out of your head sometimes and give you relief, just like volunteering does. Volunteering is great too because you're focusing more on somebody else and not yourself. And so, it's a great tool to have to help you. But sometimes we can't handle it. Sometimes we can't get out of the house. Sometimes we can't maintain. And so, when that happens, that's when you need to get some bigger guns out and help. Whether turning back to your doc, turning towards medication, those things right there. But get out of the house, change your environment, change your viewpoint, even if it means you go walk around at Walmart for 30 minutes or go to the park or something. Changing your environment and what you're looking at and staring at instead of staring at four walls will help you a lot. Now, when it comes to work and PTSD, work does create a lot of stress and not necessarily the good kind. It's a very delicate thing to discuss your condition with your employers. I cannot recommend or tell you what to do in that matter. This is a case-by-case basis on there, but if you have serious psychiatric problems and it's affecting your work, it would be very behoove you to bring your employers into the loop. But before you do that, you need to be prepared for the possible consequences and outcome of it, though, too, because not everybody responds well to those of us who suffer from a psychiatric disorder. And so it can affect your job, can affect promotions, can affect employment when you discuss with your boss about having a mental disorder, especially when you're missing work or you have to cut out early or you have an anxiety attack while you're on the job. Those things right there, they're embarrassing, they're private, but they also leave you very vulnerable and exposed. And so I've had what they call a decompensation. Decompensation happened when I was in the ER, working ER in Walter Reed in DC, when I was suffering from the early onset of bipolar. And it was embarrassing to break down and have a hysterical fit of crying, and had to be sedated, heavy sedation, in order to calm me down, and following a hospital stay of over a week. It's one of those things that's hard to live with, but at the same time, that's out of your hands. And to realize that if you talk to your boss about it, hopefully they'll understand about your condition. Hopefully they'll be able to relate, and hopefully they'll be able to, make accommodations for you. Even though your job, they can't discriminate against you. It's very hard to prove discrimination sometimes, especially when you have a bad track record for not showing up, or calling in sick, or having problems at work, poor work performance. Be very careful with how you deal with it. Just the same with talking with your family and friends about your disorder. A lot of people are very private about it because they're embarrassed to admit that they have a disorder. And that's part of the stigma of mental illness. The way people treat you when they find out that you got a disorder. They can treat you several ways. They can treat you as if you're broken and fragile. They can treat you as a pariah. But they can also embrace you and be supportive too. You might be surprised how much people can support you if you share with them, your current conditions. And again, I talked about connecting, through groups and stuff like that, in a group setting, like a support group, but also outside of support group, connect with other people who will also suffer with the same disorder as you, whether it's PTSD or bipolar or depression and stuff like that. You connect with other people just through other activities. Recently I went on a backpacking trip in Colorado with no barriers, with other veterans who similarly suffer from PTSD and other disorders. A lot of them were combat vets, but it was fantastic to connect with them. And we still stay connected through Facebook groups and stuff like that, checking in on each other and all that, because connecting with other people is so important. We're social creatures. We're not created to be alone. Some people are, but for the mass majority of us, we're not created to be alone. And so making those connections and with others is a fantastic way to help you out. Another thing is, learning coping mechanisms and skills, especially when you're going through a rough patch. If you're able to, connect with other people, if you're able to get prescribed medication, if you're able to, therapy and all that other stuff, that's fantastic. Now, one thing, when I was reading through all these studies that was very distressing was the number of people who didn't have who didn't have another he didn't have another didn't have a I want to say availability of proper mental health services. There's not enough of mental health workers out there, and so they those people are a lot of them are superheroes, and but they're also human, and they can't always go help everybody, and so thinking back to the movie The Joker with Joaquin Phoenix and what had happened to that character there, Arthur, with who became the Joker, how he was doing the things that his therapist wanted to do in a overcrowded, overburdened system. He was still trying to take his meds, still trying to journal, still trying to do all these positive things to maintain. And then all of a sudden, because of budget cuts, lost it all and had no support network whatsoever, no more help getting medication, no more help with with a therapist, and his mental health degraded rapidly from whatever psychiatric condition he had suffered from, and then turned violence. And one thing that's misleading about the Joker is that the majority of us out there who suffer from a psychiatric problem are not violent people. We don't act out. We may act inward internally, being self-destructive or even suicidal and self-harming. But rarely do people with psychiatric problems act out like they did, like the Joker did in the movie. It's because if that was true, a huge population of us would be rising up and causing mayhem if that was true. So, that's one of the things that mental health is not. We're not violent people. And unfortunately, we're more likely to hurt ourselves more than we might hurt somebody else. And so, it's the media's coverage of mental illness has been horrendous, whether it's a mass shooting or something else, where somebody does act out in a violent manner, and then they paint a broad paintbrush on all of us, making all of us seem like that we're just one step away from getting a gun and shooting up a school or a workplace or a public place. When the fact is we're not like that. We are not dangerous people. We just have problems that need special attention and specialized help for us in order to deal with it. And so, the media's coverage of the conditions that we have and stuff like that has been horrendous and has not improved very much, especially in Hollywood. Oftentimes if somebody does suffer some kind of disorder, it's portrayed in a very negative way, a very destructive way. Now, I'm not saying that there's a ton of positive things with mental illness and stuff like that. I mean, there's some things that are positive, especially when I'm manic and stuff like that, and being very creative and getting things done, But also there are some bad things about it too, especially when depression sets in. My worst depressive episode happened about almost a decade ago, and it lasted for over 3 years. 3 years of solid, deep, dark depression. I spent almost a year in my bedroom before I was able to come out. I mean, physically leave the bedroom, because that was how bad it was. I was taking my meals in there. I only left to go to the bathroom. I wasn't taking care of myself, and I was in bed all day, and my muscles atrophied. I lost a lot of, I gained weight, but also lost a lot of muscle mass, lost my endurance in it. I mean, even walking across the room became laborious. That was how bad it was becoming because of my sedentary life. So, I say that to say, though, that there was light at the end of the tunnel, and it wasn't a freight train, that the depression finally did lift. And I hope to God it doesn't come back again like they did that time. But also, I had a lot of stuff going on in my life. I wasn't medicated properly, or I wasn't taking my meds properly at that time, and I suffered from it. And so taking care of yourself is so important. So let's go ahead real quick as we come to the end of the show. I want to I want to just show, what do I want to do? I'm coming to the end of the show, so I'm going to go ahead and go take a real quick commercial break, and then we'll tie this up. Here we go.
Rochester Winter Parafest is back, March 25th, 26th, and 27th of 2022. Come say hi to Naked and Afraid celebrities Melanie Elizabeth and Trent Nielsen, Haunted Case Files, Jack Hanna, Monster Quest, Steve Coles, and more. This event has it all: paranormal investigators, UFO researchers, Bigfoot researchers, and even photo opportunities for the kids with Buddy the Bigfoot. Oh, okay, adults too. Come on down and get a tattoo from Ink Master Tony DeVille. There are psychic gallery and individual readings, as well as radio personalities, authors, jewelry, makeup artists, and so much more. It's only $15 per person, and children under 10 are free. March 25th, 26th, and 27th of 2022. For more information, go to WLFE-DB.com. Yes, Winter Parafest is back. Valley Oak Event Center, Geneseo, New York, next to Denny's.
All right, we're back as we come to a close on this show, this episode of the Bipolar DM. Thank you again for tuning into the show. I appreciate every one of you so much. And, again, watch us live on Saturdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here, wherever you're watching this, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, Twitch TV, Variety Unlimited channel on Stream TV. Check us out live, and you can comment or respond. We have guests and everything like that, but check us out. Go to WLFE-DB.com for more information, or go to thebipolardm.com to find out more about it. You can also we also put this up as a podcast, so listen to this show anytime and anywhere where you find your favorite podcast, whether it's on Apple, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeart, Google, Amazon. We're all over the place on that one. So check us out there. And next week's show, we're going to have a great interview with a professional DM named Craig, who does corporate team building events and uses Dungeons and Dragons for those. I mean, fantastic stuff. And so check us out next week. And that's who our next week's guest is. And then following week, we're going to have Jason Eastman back, who we had on previously, another professional DM, great guy. I'm actually going to be playing at his table and playing Dungeons and Dragons with him tomorrow on Friday. And I'm really looking forward to it. Ever since I did the interview, I've been wanting to play at his table. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing how a professional DM plays their game. And so thank you again for tuning in to the Bipolar DM Show. And remember, everybody, take your meds.
Thank you for listening to the Bipolar DM. They love sharing thoughts and ideas. See you next week, 7 p.m. Saturdays on WLFE-DB.com, where our shows are your shows, and that makes for great talk radio. WLFE Digital Broadcast Network is on TV. You can watch all of our shows on WLFE-DB.com. WLFB.com. Check out our channels. Paranormal View for all of your paranormal type shows. LGBTQ Friends for all of our LGBTQ shows. Variety Unlimited for all other shows. It runs 24/7 right on WLFB-TV.com. You'll even catch the lives, all in one place. Never miss an episode, past or future. WLFE-GB.com, where our shows are your shows.